Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to Healing Outside the Box. My name is Jean Tiberio, and I'm a nutritionist and a wellness coach. And you're listening to episode 165, which I'm calling the 411 on leaky gut. Now, first, a disclaimer on this whole leaky gut thing. In no way is the problem or the solution very well understood. I'm just taking this on as a separate episode because I've had a few questions related to leaky gut, and I firmly believe that we need to fully understand it before we can tackle what to do about it. So here's the question that's being asked. How do I know I have a leaky gut, and what can I do to fix it? I'll start by going over the definition of leaky gut and the symptoms. I know I've defined it in previous episodes, but it's worth repeating because I feel this is an important part of discovering possible sources of this worsening problem and its connection to autoimmune diseases. So leaky gut is literally defined as increased intestinal permeability. The lining of our intestines has a single layer of epithelial cells. The fact that it's only a single layer of cells is important because it means that this layer of cells is sensitive to attack from toxins and pathogenic bacteria. Under normal circumstances, the lining of epithelial cells in our intestinal wall allows simple substances to get through into our bloodstream, but blocks others that might create an immune response. Examples of substances that get through are amino acids and, say, a single molecule of glucose. This gut lining blocks non-food substances, along with complex carbohydrates, like foods that we used to call roughage. As I said, an example of a simple protein substance is an amino acid. An example of a more complex protein substance is gluten. Now, if this lining in our intestines becomes damaged, it causes undigested food, toxic waste products, such as the active ingredient in Roundup, and foodborne pathogens to get through into our bloodstream. Since our bloodstream is a sterile place and knows what substances are not welcome, our immune system attacks these invaders. It is well accepted now that leaky gut is a thing and can cause digestive problems like irritable bowel syndrome, diarrhea, bloating, general stomach achiness, heartburn, and even Crohn's disease. Now, it could be that you may experience other types of symptoms because once a foreign substance sneaks into our bloodstream and our blood travels everywhere, the resulting attack on this substance could happen anywhere. So other types of symptoms might be foggy headedness, irritability, all types of skin conditions, and even generalized autoimmune diseases like MS, Parkinson's, or maybe even Alzheimer's disease. So it's just as possible for you to feel really tired and worn out. Maybe have some general achiness as you would if your body is fighting the flu. You might have some psychological symptoms such as anxiety or insomnia. I know I sound like a commercial for a new drug to treat anything that ails you, but there's actually a few NIH articles that support this theory. I'll give you a link in the show notes to a recent one that goes into this in a lot more detail. I'm going to quote a few sentences from this article because they can say it better than I can. Quote, "In individuals with a genetic predisposition, a leaky gut may allow environmental factors to enter the body and trigger the initiation and development of autoimmune disease. Growing evidence shows that the gut microbiota is important in supporting the epithelial barrier and therefore plays a key role in the regulation of environmental factors that enter the body. Several recent reports have shown that probiotics can reverse the leaky gut by enhancing the production of tight junction proteins. However, additional and longer-term studies are still required. Conversely, pathogenic bacteria can facilitate a leaky gut and induce autoimmune symptoms." End quote. The author goes on to say that you can potentially treat or fix the leaky gut by restoring your healthy gut bacteria. They suggest that the best way to do that is through probiotics, whether in pill form or in food form. So, under normal conditions, there is a physical barrier which allows only small compounds like amino acids and glucose to get through. Then there is our immune system barrier, which attacks anything that gets through. Now, about the immune system barrier, below the intestinal epithelial cells, there are organized lymphoid follicles. If you think about the lymph nodes being connected to your immunity, then it's like lymph nodes in the walls of your intestines. Inside the lymphoid follicles, there's a variety of immune cells, including T cells, B cells, and also something called M cells. And these cells can produce antibodies. Then there is the biochemical barrier. This is where the stomach starts out very acidic with lots of hydrochloric acid to break down our food and kill pathogenic bacteria. Bacteria do not like acidic environments, so the hydrochloric acid starts killing some of these pathogens that we ingest before it can get to our intestines. Then as the food travels to the small intestines, the pH gets more neutral. In other words, there is less acid and an environment that breeds healthy gut bacteria. There are also substances like leptin that are antagonistic towards the invaders in our food supply. Lastly, there is the bacterial barrier. This is where the good bacteria are fighting off or outgrowing the bad bacteria. As for the bacterial barrier, we have what I call the beneficial bacteria bar bouncer barrier. I know, easy for me to say. This is a population of healthy gut bacteria, or as we say now, our gut microbiota, or microbiome. These healthy gut bacteria, that usually have names like lactobacillus or bacillus, are there to outgrow the bad bacteria. It's kind of like the Westerns. There's no room for the bad guys in town if the good guys are already there with guns blazing. So all of these defense mechanisms that block foodborne bacteria and toxins are very complex and kind of amazing. So what's the problem now? What's up with all these diseases? It's now well accepted that what we call leaky gut or increased intestinal permeability is occurring in greater frequency for many possible reasons. In my opinion, the most important reason may be the overall quality of our diet. Once the delicate lining to our intestines becomes damaged, remember that single layer of cells? Then we have all kinds of problems. Infections, alcohol, and toxins can all have a greater effect because they are getting through. That last bit is important, again in my opinion, because it defends the need for many of us to use organics and to buy things like local honey and yogurt. So let's talk about this diet-induced gut leakiness. Okay, let's start with food ingredients and the nutrients in those ingredients. Food ingredients break down to those simple compounds like amino acids and glucose and are taken up into our bloodstream. The cells then take in these simple substances and make their own proteins and burn the glucose for energy, etc. Also, these simple substances contribute to the maintenance of our gut bacteria and our intestinal barrier. A lack of nutrients due to poor diet, for whatever reason, will lower our gut defense mechanism. For example, all of those immune function proteins in our gut, like T cells and M cells, are produced from proteins, and we get those proteins from food. I remember looking back on my days working in the hospital, where I learned a ton of things during the first 6 months that I was there, more than I would ever learn from textbooks. One of the things that struck me was how quickly someone's immune function could tank after 3 days of not eating protein. There was a research article from a scientist by the name of DeSantis, which showed that there was increased leakiness in patients that had a vitamin D deficiency. He theorized that vitamin D, in addition to proteins, played a key role in the immune system defense inside that lining to our intestines. He referred to this area of the intestinal lining as the mucosal barrier. So whenever you hear the word mucus, think immune function response to infectious organisms. So he's saying that sufficient protein intake and vitamin D both appear to play an important role in keeping the immune function part of our intestinal barrier intact. The second thing in food, fiber. When it comes to fiber, we can get into a discussion about, say, switching from a bacon and eggs diet to an oatmeal diet. So what worked? Was it the removal of the bacon and eggs or the addition of the oatmeal? Does the added fiber help if you want to lower your cholesterol? Or does the saturated fat hurt and then help once it's removed? Normally, I stray away from words like good versus bad when it comes to food ingredients, but it simplifies matters here. So which matters more, taking away the bad or adding the good? With fiber, if you want to heal your leaky gut, it's actually both. A lack of fiber hurts, and a boost in fiber helps. As I mentioned in previous episodes, there are billions of bacteria in our gut. Under healthy conditions, it's an orchestra where the beautiful, beneficial bacteria kill off the invaders that don't belong there. A recent study, one of many, found that there was an increase in the population of invading bacteria when a person ate a low-fiber diet. The bacteria that didn't belong there produced a thinner mucus. Now, I know what you're thinking. Nobody likes mucus, even the word, especially when they think of those commercials when the mucus people are walking around being irritating. But when it comes to the lining of our intestines, and we already have a leaky gut, we need our mucus-producing immune system to fight off the pathogens. In this particular study, he found that a low-fiber diet, when these bad bacteria were present, led to a higher susceptibility to colitis-causing pathogens. Having colitis is definitely worse than having intestinal mucus. You can trust me on that. I've worked with a few patients with active colitis, and they were weak and miserable. If the low-fiber diet also has lots of saturated fats, another study found that it decreases that beneficial lactobacillus and increases a particular species of bad bacteria. These changes were also found to make the leaky gut worse. As for increased fiber healing our leaky gut, well, that's pretty much the therapy that any medical professional would recommend to you right now. As for the type of fiber, all types of fiber are good. Fruits are good, especially fruits with skins. Blueberries are thought to be particularly good because they also have antioxidant properties. Vegetables of all kinds, whole grain organic breads, beans, nuts, and seeds. By the way, seeds do have a lot of fiber. For example, there are 12 grams of fiber in a cup of peanuts, 5 grams for a cup of walnuts, and 17 grams of fiber for a cup of soybeans. As for the last one, that is actually a lot of soybeans, and we don't usually take in that much soybeans by themselves. But we're just saying that nuts and seeds are good sources of fiber. The third thing when it comes to food ingredients that should be included is a discussion about glyphosate. As we probably know by now, glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup. I'm picking on glyphosate, but other herbicides would fall into the same category. I'll give you a link for the article that I'll be talking about. This whole subject of Roundup causing leaky gut is no longer talk around the water cooler at extremist left-wing organizations. This article is actually from the NIH, and they're pretty much confirming that glyphosate from Roundup is not only getting into the food we eat, it is also one of the major contributing factors to the damage in our intestines. They start out by saying that gluten intolerance and celiac disease are much more common in our country and in Europe than anywhere else in the world. What makes these countries unique is our industrial food supply. I'm going to quote directly from this article because the NIH is conservative and they genuinely make sure they get their facts straight before giving a definitive statement, like this one. Quote, "Here we propose that glyphosate, the active ingredient in the herbicide Roundup, is the most important causal factor in this epidemic." They go on to say that they exposed fish to glyphosate and those fish develop celiac disease. That eliminates the factor of psychological stress on at least this particular group of GI illnesses. So much for the Monsanto claim that Roundup only kills plants. There are now people deaths associated with Roundup. Here is another quote. "We argue that the practice of ripening sugarcane with glyphosate may explain the recent surge in kidney failure among agricultural workers in Central America. We conclude with a plea to governments to reconsider policies regarding the safety of glyphosate residues in foods." End quote. So those and other farm workers are literally the canaries in the coal mines. Glyphosate may also interfere with the breakdown of complex proteins in the human stomach, leaving larger fragments of, say, wheat that will then trigger an autoimmune response. So the larger fragments of wheat is literally gluten. So there is clear evidence that the problem is not gluten itself. The problem is that we already have damage to the lining of our gut, which is then allowing gluten, a complex protein, to enter the bloodstream. There's another similar article from the organicconsumers.org people, and I'll leave you the link for that in the show notes as well. Personally, I have all that I need to make my opinionated verdict on both Roundup and similar herbicides. I think that it's time to stop eating foods or try to stop eating foods that contain Roundup and maybe boycott all genetically modified foods altogether, certainly ones that are sprayed with Roundup. I know that's a lot to think about, so I'm going to keep talking about this and keep checking up with the literature. Now, in order for you to look for foods that are not genetically modified, just look on the label for the words non-GMO or certified organic. Now, instead of the nutrition label that we all told you to read, you may want to switch and just look at the ingredients, especially if you have any intolerances or just want to stay away from these industrial chemicals. I know I'm getting long-winded today, but I just wanted to briefly go over 2 other factors that may trigger leaky gut and perhaps how to fix them. So I'll leave that to next week's episode. I also want to look into a specific type of probiotic that has been proven in studies to help leaky gut, and I'll read more about that for next week's episode. Until then, be well and stay tuned next week for another episode of Healing Outside the Box.